Hey, welcome to the Big Me Kickoff. I'm your host, Kevin Noon. It is Friday, one day away from the game. All the other games don't really matter when you look at the Michigan game. That is the game that everybody wants to talk about. I don't care how many times Ohio State wins it. I don't care how many times Michigan wins it. It is the game that everybody talks about. We're in the era of national championships and everything else. But if you lose this game, you're going to hear about it. And Ohio State's been on the right end of this one for many, many years. Very different than when I was an undergrad at Ohio State and they never could win it. I was there for the tie, the greatest win in Ohio State history, according to then President E. Gordon Gee. But the Buckeyes have had their way now. But Michigan, top five team, bringing in maybe their best team in quite some time. I'm going to bring in Michael Spath, good friend of mine who I have worked with in the past, and he's here to talk about the Michigan Wolverines. First and foremost, how are you doing, Michael?
I'm doing great, and you're right talking about this game. When you look at like rivalry week this particular year, I mean Alabama and Auburn doesn't really have much luster. Washington State, the Apple Cup, no luster. I mean, outside of Michigan, Ohio State, wouldn't you kind of argue that Oklahoma State, and maybe the Oregon State because it's deciding the Pac-12 North. Those are the ones that seemingly matter the most. But I don't remember a year where it was just Michigan, Ohio State, the entire focus, two top five teams according to the college football playoff ranking. And then there's really not a marquee game, in my opinion, after Michigan, Ohio State this weekend.
No, you look, I mean, Auburn goes in with no Bo Nix against Alabama. That should be about a 28-point game, even with Alabama struggling against Arkansas. You're right. I think Bedlam between Oklahoma State, that could be a fun one, but not a lot, especially with like the Egg Bowl taking place, last night. I mean, there's not a ton of great games. I think a lot of things are already determined. We get to championship week. We don't know what every championship matchup's going to look like. We don't want to pencil anything in. We do know Alabama and UGA will take on each other. That one's already locked in. But, this week kind of devoid of a lot of these other rivalries that we're used to talking about. So both pregame shows, Fox and ESPN, will be in Ann Arbor. This is going to be the epicenter of college football.
Yeah, I'm excited to be there. I've been a member of the sports media for 20 years, and I've always sat in a press box, either at the shoe or at the big house. And a year and a half ago or so, I left sports media behind when COVID was happening, and just moved on to something else. Still do a weekly segment with my former guys on WTK in Ann Arbor. But so this is the first year, Kevin, first year since I was a student at Michigan that I will be at a Michigan football game outside in the crowd in November. I haven't been to a Michigan Ohio State game since the 2001 game as a fan. And I'm going with my brother tomorrow, so I'm super excited about that. And the hope right now in Ann Arbor, I mean, there's a lot of people that I think they're like talking themselves into optimism, right? Like, I mean, if you're not a fan, if you don't believe your team can win, then what's really the point of ever being a fan? Like, so there's a lot of Michigan fans that believe their team can win. A lot has to go right for Michigan in order for them to win this game. But certainly there is a level of optimism, excitement, and energy, and it'll be dialed up 1,000% tomorrow in Ann Arbor.
Would you say that? I mean, Michigan came out to this hot start. I mean, they ran the ball well the first three games, rushed for more than 1,000 yards there. The season crescendos up, and then lightning kind of strikes against Michigan State. Little brother doesn't go the way that it's supposed to go. How did people handle that loss to Sparty, and have they recovered in terms of what you're saying that some people are talking themselves up into this? I mean, we see it. I mean, why be a fan if you can't get excited about this type of game? But I mean, is the level of excitement, has it reached where it was maybe pre-Michigan State? Because at that point, I think a lot of people were really feeling like this is going to be the year. This is going to be the year we're going to finally break through. First win against Ohio State since 2011.
Yeah, I mean, certainly the Michigan State game was very disappointing if you're a Michigan fan because, you were up by 16 points midway through the third quarter. And you had a chance to exact some revenge on the Spartans. Jim Harbaugh has not had a good record against Michigan State. He's 3-4 against the Spartans in 7 years. I mean, to many, that's a more shocking number than his 0-5 against Ohio State because at least when they look at Ohio State, they see a talent gap between Michigan and the Buckeyes. But the talent gap is the opposite way between Michigan and Michigan State. Like Michigan is, according to any rankings you take out, the recruiting rankings, the number of stars and the whole thing, Michigan is by far the more talented team. And so, when you saw that loss, it was really disheartening for Michigan fans. But since then, Kevin, you have Michigan going out there, going to State College in a tough environment and beating Penn State. While it didn't count as a top 25 win or a top 10 win, it was a very difficult win. The Buckeyes know how hard it is to beat Penn State the last couple of years, especially when you're in State College. They've done it, but it's never an easy game for Ohio State, and it wasn't for Michigan. And then you had last week against Maryland, and Michigan put up their season high in points and really had everything going, and two quarterbacks that played well, and a running game that came back alive, and great special teams play. And so when you look at this game tomorrow against Ohio State, the reason that people are super excited about it is because everything's on the line. When they lost to Michigan State, they lost control of their own destiny. But then Ohio State went out there, took care of business against the Spartans a week ago. And now whoever wins this game wins the Big Ten East. And whoever wins this game not only wins the Big Ten East, but it's going to go up against Wisconsin or Iowa that can both be formidable in their own way. But really, we're talking about a de facto playoff, a play-in playoff game for Michigan, Ohio State right now. And so I think people are geeked about that. It's a top 5 matchup, number 2 versus number 5. We've been fortunate as Michigan and Ohio State fans to have quite a few of those in this rivalry over the last 15, 20 years, even beyond that. So because of those factors, people are really excited. And it's in Ann Arbor. It hasn't been, some of these top 5 matchups, 2016, 2018, these were down in the shoe. And so this one is back in Michigan's, home confines. And so, yeah, there is a level of excitement. I would say it's close to about 100 as you can possibly be for this Michigan-Ohio State rivalry.
And Ohio State fans won't be quick to let Michigan fans remember that Michigan, quote unquote, ducked Ohio State last year. So, there are a lot of people that are salty on this side about the fact that Michigan didn't come to the horseshoe for their every other year whooping. So, I think that even adds more to the excitement because these two teams didn't play last year. And we know that the COVID numbers were terrible and Michigan really was not going to be able to roll a team out there with where things were reportedly. So I know from the Ohio State side of things, fans are excited. They're after the loss to Oregon, Ohio State fans, a lot of them were concerned that the season could really jump the shark quickly because the defense was messed up. CJ Stroud, there were questions whether or not he was the guy, whether they should look at Kyle McCord, what should go on there. And then Ohio State has been getting better and better. And then there was the 2-game stretch against Penn State and Nebraska where Ohio State didn't necessarily look like Ohio State. And then to go out and hand it to a number 7 Michigan State team, excitement is through the roof. So you say it's close to 100. It's about 110 in Columbus. I'll tell you that right now.
Yeah, and I think Michigan fans, whatever you want to say about last year, and I don't really have much of a comment on it. I didn't, I don't want to question, when COVID was happening and everything was going on, I don't want to question athletic departments and say that they're lying about numbers. I certainly think that everybody knows what would have happened if the two teams played a year ago. Michigan was 2-4 and was a really bad football team, and Ohio State was 7-0 at the time, 6-0 at the time, and playing really well. So I certainly think that it would have been a very lopsided result. But because they didn't play a year ago, because they haven't played since 2019, there is that added level of anticipation for tomorrow's game.
Anticipation on the Ohio State side is about seeing what defensive ends Aiden Hutchinson and David Ojabo are going to be able to do. The two have single-handedly, made the Michigan defense into something to behold. Just how good are these two? Because the way that people talk about them in one regard, you would think that they each had 30 sacks apiece. They don't, but they are game changers. And, what do you expect to see out of them in this type of situation?
Yeah, well, it'd be interesting because, Kevin, they're coming off the first time. I think for David Ojabo, he had a sack in 6 straight games, which was a Michigan single-season record. And then Aiden Hutchinson, who is the son of course, Chris Hutchinson, who was a All-American defensive tackle for the Wolverines in the early 90s. Everybody's kind of heard the story. His dad is now a ER doctor at one of the biggest hospitals in the state of Michigan. And so a great family and a great legacy. I would say this, that I've been watching Michigan football for, 35, 37 years, something like that, ever since I was a little, sitting in my dad's lap. But I've been, covering the team in some capacity for the last 20 years, 21 years. And they are the best defensive end duo that I've seen in the last 21 years. And there's been some really great players who have come out of Michigan. James Hall and Glenn Steele is probably number two. They were back in the national championship year 97 and then 98. Lamar Woodley in 2006. Lamar Woodley and Rondell Biggs. Lamar Woodley tied the Michigan single season record with 12 sacks. And now you've got these two guys who, for the first time in program history, you have two defensive linemen at the same time who have 10 or more sacks. It's never happened in the 140 years of Michigan football prior to this. I would say this: what makes them most special is with Hutchinson, it's an array of moves. He does have the speed to go around the outside. He has that bull rush where he can just kind of, I don't want to say lift someone off their feet. Let's not be hyperbolic here, right? Like he's not picking guys up like he's Superman and like dropping them, but he's gaining leverage, and you get underneath the guy and you can backpedal him and he can get to him. He has that nice spin move and the swim move too to come inside. And then Ojabo is kind of like that prototypical, Von Miller, the guys that we've seen come out of the NFL. I don't want to say Myles Garrett, maybe a little bit of Chase Young, and just that he is so incredibly athletic and so incredibly fast. He doesn't have a power move right now. He's got a straight speed rush. But when you've got a guy who is 6'5" and 260 pounds like he is, and he's running a 4.5 40, I mean, that is really hard for left tackles and for right tackles to combat. I mean, we've seen it the last couple of years with a lot of great Ohio State Buckeye defensive ends. And so between the two of them, I mean, in every single play, CJ Stroud and Ohio State's offensive line are going to have to know, like, who we've got. Are we putting a tight end over there? Are we chipping with the running back? I don't want to say, again, like, hey, if you block them one-on-one, they're unblockable. Like, so often in sports, we use, like, these terms that are just so generic, like, oh, he's invincible. And like, no. Like, you can block him one-on-one, but if you block him one-on-one, 30 times in the game, I bet you on 15 of them, he's making your life a living hell. And so, that's a pretty good success rate. And when you look at it, Ohio State's going to have to do something. Now, they're coming off a game where they played, I mean, some of the best offensive line that we've seen this year in keeping Michigan State's defensive line at bay. CJ Stroud stood back there. Again, I won't be hyperbolic and say, like, I could have completed those touchdown passes, but a lot of quarterbacks who play at that level probably could have with as much time and the cleanness of that pocket back there. And so they're playing super well. Michigan's defensive ends are really, really good. And there's really not a lot of other guys up front. I mean, they've got some defensive tackles who have kind of emerged, but, these two guys have combined for 20 sacks, and Michigan has 29 on the year. Right. So it's not like if these two guys aren't getting it, somebody else is coming in and clean it up. I mean, I think the third place guy on the team has 1.5 sacks. So it's really, if you can stop these two guys, or at least somewhat keep them at bay, Ohio State's going to be in a great position tomorrow.
Speaking on the Michigan defense, staying on that side of the ball, the defensive pass numbers against them are very good. Michigan not allowing a ton of yardage. I mean, their pass efficiency defense numbers are pretty good. I looked at their schedule, though. I mean, Maryland can throw the ball around. Yeah. I mean, one of the other teams that actually can throw the ball around is the best 3-8 team in the history of football, Nebraska. But, obviously haven't gone against the CJ Stroud. Are we not speaking enough about the secondary? Is the defensive pass numbers, are they a result of what Ojabo and Hutchinson are doing? What is your take on the Michigan secondary and what they've been able to do against opposing passers?
Yeah, it's really a no-name group. I mean, Dax Hill is the most famous player, a 5-star that was at one time committed to Alabama, ended up coming to Michigan, but he really doesn't have eye-popping numbers. He's got 2 interceptions on the year. I mean, this isn't a Charles Woodson-like campaign here from Dax Hill. And most of the time, he's not even playing safety. Most of the times, he's playing like a nickel corner and trying to take that best wide receiver from the opposing team out of play. The rest of the guys, DJ Turner, Vincent Gray, RJ Moten, Brad Hawkins. I mean, if I put all 4 of them in front of the average fan, I don't think the average fan is going to say, like, well, I mean, maybe that guy. I mean, they're not going to really know. Like, it's not really a named group. But what they do well is they do get a lot of help from those guys up front that are forcing quarterbacks to throw the football, a second earlier than they want to. They've played really well in the zone scheme this year. That's one of the biggest storylines of the offseason and the season is Michigan made a transition from Don Brown to Mike McDonald, the first-year defensive coordinator from the Baltimore Ravens. And he has done a great job mixing up coverages. And so if Ohio State fans, and I'm sure tons of them have watched Michigan this year, but if they're expecting like, hey, we're just going to run crossing routes, we're going to run seam routes, we're just going to throw the ball deep like we always have against Michigan because they're playing us man-to-man on an island, like that's not the case this year. And I think because of that, those guys have really responded pretty well to a lot of the principles and a lot of the different coverages they're doing. And then, they're just solid covermen. They're not guys who are breaking up a lot of passes. They're not guys who are making plays on the football, but they're creating like really tight windows for quarterbacks to have to throw the football into. And if you're a quarterback and you're dropping back and you're looking at like that window is, instead of it being as big as my arms here, it's like here. A lot of times you don't throw to that guy. You throw the check down, you throw to the tight end, you throw to the running back out of the backfield. And so I think that's really helped this Michigan secondary so far, is that they're just strong coverage guys without being playmakers, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, I was going through and writing a piece earlier this week. I think teams are completing 56.4% of their passes against Michigan, which is a really good number. But, talking about completing passes, let's flip over to the other side of the ball. Cade McNamara.
Mm-hmm.
He's 7-1 in terms of 14 touchdowns, 2 interceptions. But you look at his average pass, I mean, he's only throwing it 3 to 5 yards down the field and then letting his receivers go out there and do things. And when Ronnie Bell goes down very early in the season, kind of a no-name group of receivers out there doing things. I don't think anybody in Columbus knew who Andrew Anthony was until a couple of weeks ago. I don't think anybody knows who Mike Sanistril is, and certainly tight end Eric All, who seems to be kind of their weapon. But what do you expect out of Cade McNamara? Would he be free to go downfield? Is that just something that they've held back because they haven't needed to do it? Or what do you make of that?
No, I don't think they've held back because they haven't needed to do it. I think they've held back because it's not what Cade McNamara does well. When you look at any ball that he throws beyond 20 yards in the air, it's usually behind the receiver, off target, underthrown, and so guys are having to stop and wait for it. What I give this Michigan passing offense and their coordinators and their coaches a lot of credit for is they figured out, like, Cade McNamara doesn't have the ability to throw the deep ball, but what he has the ability to do is he's really fearless about throwing the ball over the middle, about throwing to his tight ends and his slot receivers on seam routes. He's fearless about throwing it on crossing routes. And last week against Maryland, we saw him really good on throwing the ball out in the flat to his running back on wheel routes and just getting it to him. And so you're right in that Michigan is trying to put their receivers in positions where they're in one-on-one matchups, and Cade McNamara throws it 10 yards, 12 yards, at max like 15 yards, but he's putting it right out in front, and those guys catch it. They catch it in stride, and then can they make that one guy miss? Can they make the safety miss? Can they shake the tackle from their cornerback that's on them? And what we've seen the last couple of weeks is they've made a lot of those guys miss. Andrew Anthony had a 93-yard catch and run against Michigan State. Eric All with the huge play, the 48-yarder that he catches on a 6-yard crossing route against Penn State and goes the other 42 yards by himself. Last week against Maryland, Cade McNamara throws a 15-yard wheel route to Donovan Edwards, and he goes the other 62 yards for a 77-yard touchdown. Like, they have figured out, like, this is what this kid does well. He's got a lot of moxie. He's got a lot of confidence. I mean, I've watched a lot of Michigan quarterbacks in my lifetime, and there's a lot of more talented quarterbacks than Cade McNamara. I don't know that many that have stood in the pocket and taken the hits that he takes and has delivered a good ball when he's taken those hits. That's a hard thing to do. That's what Michigan's been able to do to a lot of teams this year is when they're hitting guys or they're forcing those early throws, those passes are off target. He stands in there and he takes a nasty hit and he still delivers a good ball. Again, it's only 6, 10, 12, 14 yards down the field, but he's hitting those guys in stride, and then those guys are making plays. And what's interesting about this game for Cade McNamara is, like, every Michigan fan has spent the entire season, myself included, talking about what he's not. And what he is a 10-game winner at the moment. What he is a guy who has a 7-to-1 touchdown to interception ratio. What he is a guy completing 65% of his passes. And he's got a lot of those intangible qualities that make a great quarterback. And his game on Saturday, I mean, Michigan's not going to probably win or lose because of Cade McNamara. But I mean, he's got to go out there and do what he did against Maryland. He's got to throw for 250 to 300, maybe even 325. He's got to throw a couple of balls that his receivers and his running backs can make big plays off of. after they catch it. If he does that, I mean, his legacy is going to be 11-1 and beat Ohio State and gone to the Big Ten championship game. And I don't give a damn like if he can't throw a ball down the field, right? Like I don't give a damn if he doesn't run the read option and pull it and run 30 yards down the field. Like if that's what his resume is, that's his resume is better than any Michigan quarterback in the last decade. And the rest of us who want him to be J.J. McCarthy or want him to be C.J. Stroud or want him to be Justin Fields or Trevor Lawrence or whatever like that, like the rest of us can just shut our mouths because he's going to have all the bragging rights at that point.
Yeah, you're having to get back to the era of Denard Robinson for that win against Ohio State. But let's get to the running game. Obviously Michigan, as I said earlier, came out in the first 3 non-conference games, ran for a combined 1,050 yards, something like, I don't know, like 15 touchdowns. That was with a 1-2 punch of Hassan Haskins and Blake Corum. Blake Corum hasn't gone the last couple weeks. We did see some footage of him warming up prior to Maryland. Whether or not that was truthful or that was just some eye candy for people in Columbus to think about. What is the strength of the Michigan running game? What are your thoughts on if we should expect to see Blake Corum this week? And Ohio State is allowing like 103 yards a game on the ground. They're a pretty stingy run defense, and Ohio State traditionally has held Michigan in the last 10 games in this series. I think it was like 134 yards a game.
Yeah. Well, and I think the one thing too, if you look at the Oregon game, that obviously Ohio State lost this year, the quarterback Anthony Brown, like they ran read option. He would run the football sometimes, not a ton, but enough to keep that defense honest. And they burned Ohio State a lot on that. That's not what Michigan does. Like Cade McNamara barely pulls the ball. Maybe we see a little bit more of J.J. McCarthy, and he's running a little bit more read option. But, they rely on essentially a traditional running game with Hassan Haskins, Blake Corum, as you mentioned, and now Donovan Edwards, who has emerged the last couple of weeks. And I don't know if Blake Corum is going to play. I mean, I think he certainly would like to play. But because Donovan Edwards emerged last week against Maryland, I mean, he set a running back record with 170 receiving yards in that game. Because he did that, he's now got to be accounted for. And when he comes in the game, Ohio State just can't think like this guy's running the ball. Like they got to make sure that their pass defense is up to task against him because he's going to make some plays in that particular game. So whether it's Haskins and Edwards or Haskins and Corum or Haskins, Corum and Edwards, the Michigan running game, they've been deliberate with it. They've been stubborn with it. If that's probably the best way to say it, because there's been times where they haven't been able to run the ball in the first quarter, first half. We saw that against Nebraska. We saw that against Wisconsin. We saw it against Penn State, and they just stick to it. And they just keep running and feeding Hassan Haskins, who's one of their better backs in the last decade, honestly. And then we saw against Nebraska, they broke through in the second half, and they were able to run the football. They were able to run the football in the fourth quarter against Wisconsin. They were able to run the football in the fourth quarter against Penn State. And so they're going to stick with it because they believe it's their best chance to be successful against Ohio State tomorrow. So, you're going to see all 3 guys probably. And Hassan he's not a game breaker, but man, I mean, if you haven't watched him play this year, I mean, there's been a couple of ridiculous plays where he has had 3-4 defenders and he's in this big pile and somehow he's like, it's like a 7-yard gain. And the next thing you know, it's like a 20-yard gain. Like he's just forced the pile. He's got the best in terms of stoutness of legs and power that Michigan has had since Mike Hart graduated in 2007. Someone who, you're not bringing down with one defender. You've got to take out his ankles because if you try to tackle him high, he's just going to keep driving. And he's been, honestly, for me, one of the most fun things to watch this year, just because he's been really their best player from week 1 now here to week 12. So I think we'll see it. I mean, if Ohio State fans are expecting like Michigan to mirror them and come out throwing the football 50 times and trying to throw for 400 yards, like it ain't going to happen. And they haven't developed that all year. They're not saving anything for this game. Maybe there's a couple of, I don't want to say trick plays, like maybe they're going to, use some decoys, some deception, the things that they've shown on film that they move to a different way. But I mean, it's not going to be a whole new playbook. It's not going to be where they've been saving J.J. McCarthy for this game and he's going to go out there and take, 40 snaps in it. Like Michigan's going to do the things that they've been doing well all year, and they're going to try to win a football game in old school way, which I actually don't agree with, and I don't think is like conducive to being successful in 2021. But they've got 10 wins to show for it, and they're going to hope that they can get an 11th win by doing all those old school things of like ball control, limit the turnovers, run the football, play great defense, and hopefully for Michigan fans, score touchdowns. I think one of the biggest weaknesses as Michigan has been up until the last couple of weeks is like they get in the red zone and they don't score touchdowns, they score field goals. And every single fan knows right now is if you walk away from the red zone against Ohio State and you're settling for 3 instead of 7, then what you're going to see is that score is going to start here and it's going to get bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger, and to the point where like you get to the start of the fourth quarter and Michigan's down by 21 points because all they've been doing is settling for field goals. And so it'll be interesting to see. I am skeptical that this approach can beat Ohio State. I'd love for it to happen as a Michigan fan, but at the same time, like I just don't think it works to the extent that I think it can beat a Penn State. I think it can beat a Maryland. I think it can beat a Wisconsin. I don't think it can beat an Ohio State that way.
Yeah, Michigan 22 of 24 on field goals, and we'll go back at Ohio State had a 2-game stretch where it had to kick 8 field goals, and that was the Penn State-Nebraska stretch. And Ohio State got stymied in the red zone, kind of figured out its way, but it's going to be going against something completely different. And on your point about Hassan Haskins, yeah, you've got to chop him down because he certainly, even those 3-yard runs, he can sit there and move the pile to 7-8 yards just with that leg drive. Last question, really appreciate you joining. Kind of a 2-part question. How bad does Jim Harbaugh need this one? I mean, obviously, everybody heard the whispers and what all of us pundits like to talk about, but he's sitting on a 10-game wins or 10 wins this season. But how bad does he need this one? And additionally, kind of, you've kind of led on that you're not sure if this, there's some of their stubborn ways are going to work. I don't want to put you on the spot to put you on the spot. Kind of what do you see happening in this one?
Yeah, let's start with the Harbaugh one first. And so I think there was a growing faction, myself included, who after the 2020 season was just like, move on from this guy, okay? 0-5 against Ohio State at that point, 3-3 against Michigan State after the 2020 season. Really, I mean, he was winning 10 wins, but it was a fairly hollow 10 wins because it wasn't against Ohio State, and it wasn't, except for the first year, against a bowl opponent. The top 10 record, the record on the road against ranked opponents were all terrible. And while I'm still not convinced that Jim Harbaugh is the guy to lead Michigan to the promised land, I think for the most part, the faction of fans that were anti, which I would have said was about 50%, maybe even 60% after last season, I think it's mostly quieted down. I think what you're looking at is fans saying like, okay, Jim Harbaugh's regular, without a COVID year, his regular is going to be 9 wins, 10 wins, and then you hope for that special season where he beats Ohio State every couple of years and pulls it off and wins a Big Ten championship. But I think a lot of, when you look at like Dan Mullen getting fired, you look at Clay Helton getting fired, you look at Ed Orgeron getting fired a couple years after winning the national championship, you're looking at all these coaching scenarios and you're going like, well, maybe it ain't so bad if he's just winning 9 or 10 games a year, even if he ain't beating Ohio State. So I think there's been a lot of people who have calmed down on the anti-Harbaugh rhetoric. So does he need this game? Yeah, he needs this game because at some point, like, his legacy is going to continue to be 0 for Ohio State, 0 for 6, 0 for 7, 0 for 8. And if you're going to be a guy who measures himself against Bo or measures himself against the great coaches of Michigan football history, you got to beat Ohio State at some point. But is he on the hot seat if he loses to Ohio State? No, he's really not. It would have to take a couple more years, I think, of the same thing repeating itself for that to come back. I think he's going to be okay for a couple more years. In terms of outcome, I put on the Homer hat on Wednesday when I was on some Ann Arbor radio, and I said 38-35 Michigan. But let me put the objective, the old school journalist, the unbiased. I think it's 42-24. I don't think that Michigan can keep Ohio State out of the end zone enough, and I don't think they can outscore them. It just hasn't been the way that they've played football this year. I think it'll probably be, one of those games. Maybe it's even 28-7 or 28-10 at the half, and Ohio State starts to pull away. And we've seen that the 2018, 2019 games. I mean, Michigan kind of goes on its run in the fourth quarter, but by then it's too late. I think it'll probably be a little bit closer. I think you'll probably go into the fourth quarter with Ohio State up by, 10 or 14 and then kind of put that final dagger in it. But I just don't think that Michigan has the offensive firepower and enough defensive playmakers to keep this under 40 points for the Buckeyes. So, yeah, my non-homer take is a 42-24 win for the Buckeyes.
For those watching this show, you'll have to go to Buckeye Scoop to see my prediction. I got that written at the middle of the week, and I'm going to ride with it. But there you go. Michael, I want to thank you so much for being part of the show. It's been a while since we've talked. Great stuff as always.
Well, thanks for having me, Kevin. I really appreciate it. I always enjoy our friendship and our own little mini rivalry.
Absolutely. And I want to thank you all for watching the Big Me Kickoff. We are less than 24 hours away from kickoff. Enjoy the game, be safe, have fun, and go Bucks.
Go Blue.